Welcome to another session of water technology. Today we look into drinking water treatment, which is also called as potable water treatment. Before we move on, subscribe for more informative videos. Please do drop your comments and click the like button after watching the video if you like it. At the end of the session, you'll be able to enumerate the sources of water and contaminants present in the water. You'll be able to list out the requirements of drinking water, elaborate the process of drinking water treatment, and explain the need of each step in this process, and brief the various disinfection methods. We look into what are the surface water sources. Rivers, lakes, ponds, flood runoff, dams, and reservoirs form the surface water sources because we generally treat the surface water for drinking water. There are some standards or specifications for drinking water which varies from country to country, but these are the basic standards. The water should be free from odor, color, and taste, dissolved objectionable gases, and it should be slightly alkaline, or the pH should be about 8. The TDS should be less than 500 ppm. It will be better if it's even less. It should be free from pathogens, that is, disease causing microorganisms, bacteria, virus, protozoans, etc., and it should be free from toxic impurities and should not be turbid. But there are a lot of contaminants present in the surface water, like floating matter, suspended particles, colloidal particles, microorganisms, which has to be removed before it is suitable for drinking. We'll look into the detailed process of this drinking water treatment. There are various steps. We'll look into one by one. First step is the screening step, where the floating matter is removed, like paper, plastic, twigs, logs, leaves, fishes, because some fishes may be present in reservoir water, dams, lakes, etc. All this has to be removed before going for the next step. Here you can see that the floating matter is removed and the water which moves, here we are using a mesh or a screen which has larger holes where only the floating matter is removed, but all the other suspended particles and colloidal particles move to the next step. The next step is sedimentation. For some water treatment methods, they generally skip this method because sedimentation is again present in the last step of this water treatment process. But if lot of insoluble suspended particles are present, sedimentation is preferred at this stage. That is, the particles which are denser than water settle down at the bottom when the water is left undisturbed for few hours, that is 2 to 6 hours in a deep tank. These denser particles settle down at the bottom and the supernatant water is taken to the next step. This suspended particle can be drained off and we call it as a sludge, which can be used as a manure or as a landfill. Next step is a coagulation. Here we use some chemicals called as coagulants like alum, sodium aluminate, ferric chloride, ferrous sulfate. Any one of these can be used. Here it's very important that the stirring is very rapid because the coagulant should be uniformly dispersed throughout the water. We should ensure that the coagulant is present throughout the water because this step is mainly to remove the fine particles like clay. These fine particles are unable to settle down in the sedimentation process, which has to be removed in this process, and these fine particles will be present throughout the water. So, this coagulant also should be present throughout the water. We'll take alum. Alum is actually a hydrated form of potassium sulfate and aluminium sulfate. Although the active component is aluminium sulfate, this is very active only in slightly alkaline medium because the alkaline component, that is the calcium bicarbonate or magnesium bicarbonate, which is present in the water, reacts with this aluminium sulfate to form the gelatinous white precipitate of aluminium hydroxide. This aluminium hydroxide is dispersed uniformly throughout the water. This you should understand that the Al3 plus is positively charged and this is the active component of your coagulant. The next step is flocculation. In most of the water treatment methods, the coagulation is clubbed with flocculation or they consider both the steps as a single step. But here I have considered it separately because in coagulation we go for rapid stirring and in flocculation we go for slow mixing. Why we reduce the speed of stirring here is mainly The coagulant particles come closer. That is, the dispersed particles in the coagulation step comes closer when the stirring speed is reduced, mixing speed is reduced. This forms a floc. This is positively charged, and mostly the fine colloidal particles are negatively charged. So the negatively charged particles come closer to the positively charged flocs and get absorbed, and neutral particles like dirt particles also adhere around the floc. So by this way, the flocs become larger and larger in size, and they become heavier in weight also. So the fine particles which were unable to settle down in sedimentation process now becomes heavier. So next, when we move on to the sedimentation process, these heavy flocks descend down due to its own gravity and settle down at the bottom like any other sedimentation process when the water is left undisturbed for few hours in a deep tank, and the supernatant liquid is again taken to the next process. The next important process is the filtration process. Although we go for sedimentation, all the suspended particles and all the particles do not get removed in that sedimentation process. Some 10% of the particles remain after the sedimentation process. These left out particles and residual turbidity and some of the microorganisms also get removed in this filtration process. This is actually done in a filtration bed which is composed of 2 to 3 layers. The bottommost layer is charcoal or pebbles, which we can also use activated charcoal. When activated charcoal or anthracite is used, generally it removes the odor and taste components. That is, the bad odor and taste present in the water is removed if activated carbon is used. Next comes the coarse sand and fine sand. When the water is sprayed or sprinkled over this filtration bed, these things are removed. That is, left out particles, residual turbidity, and some of the microorganisms are removed in this filtration process, and it is taken to the next step. The last step of the drinking water treatment is the disinfection process. This is mainly to destroy the pathogens, that is, disease causing microorganisms. There are many disinfection methods, although chlorination is very widely used even today. And this is a boon for water treatment processes because even before this disinfection was adopted for water treatment, many of them used to suffer due to waterborne diseases, especially in rainy season, that is due to cholera, typhoid, polio, hepatitis, etc. Now, after chlorination has been adopted, this waterborne diseases has been reduced. And chlorination can be done in various methods, that is using bleaching powder, chloramines or liquid chlorine. In all the three cases, the most important component which is formed is hypochlorous acid. This mainly deactivates the enzymes present in the microorganisms and kills the microorganisms, pathogens. Here it's very important in chlorination, especially when you're using liquid chlorine, the residual chlorine matters a lot. Only the free chlorine acts as a disinfectant. We'll see in detail about this breakpoint chlorination and the residual chlorine in the next video, that is breakpoint chlorination, and you can look at the link at the top. And another treatment is the ozone treatment. That is, when ozone is passed through the water and kept in contact for 12 to 15 minutes, the ozone is split into a molecular oxygen and nascent oxygen. Here, nascent oxygen is a very powerful oxidizing agent which oxidizes the organic impurities as well as destroys the germs. These two methods are the chemical methods. We can go for some physical methods, where one of the co- common traditionally used physical method was boiling water for 10 to 15 minutes traditionally, which we were following. And the next most important method is ultraviolet light. If cost is not a matter, it's better that we adopt this ultraviolet irradiation. Here, the UV light, especially the wavelength of 254 nanometer, damages the nucleic acids in the microorganisms. That is, it damages the RNA and DNA of the microorganisms and destroys it. What is a major advantage of ultraviolet compared to even chlorination? Chlorination, actually, if you have organic impurities, it actually forms some carcinogenic byproducts, which is not good for health. And there is still a debate going on, especially by the environmentalists who don't want chlorination to be adopted as a disinfection method. But still, we try to eliminate that carcinogenic byproducts, and we still adopt chlorination widely because it's very cheaper and can be very easily adopted for large volumes of water. But in ultraviolet, there's another advantage, that is, some of the microorganisms, especially the protozoans, are not destroyed by chlorination. That is, even chlorine resistant microorganisms like protozoans can be easily destroyed by ultraviolet light. And another advantage is some of the pollutants, because we haven't mentioned those pollutants, assuming that the water is not polluted, but the surface waters can be polluted by industrial waste like industrial solvents, pesticides, that is from your agricultural waste, and you can have some pharmaceutical waste also. All these waste also can be destroyed using ultraviolet light, so it's more preferable. But one disadvantage with this is it cannot be used if the water is turbid. We should see that the water is free from turbidity if you're going for ultraviolet light irradiation as a disinfectant. So any of these methods can be adopted, but some of the water treatment methods, especially in the US and all, they adopt one or two methods, or sometimes all the three methods for water treatment. These are optional steps. One is aeration, that is passing molecular oxygen, especially to remove odor, taste, or it can also remove iron and manganese. If iron and manganese is present as impurities, it forms insoluble oxides of iron and manganese, which can be removed in the sedimentation process. That is, even immediately after the screening process, aeration can be done. Pre-chlorination is another important step. Sometimes they go for pre-chlorination even before the filtration step. This is because mainly to remove fats, oils and grease. This also can come as a runoff in the surface waters, which has to be removed, because no other method is going to no other step is going to take care of these wastes. So pre-chlorination is also preferred. And similar to aeration, if iron and manganese is present, these also can be removed by formation of insoluble chlorides of iron and manganese, which can be removed by sedimentation and filtration process. And this is rarely and optionally adopted. In the US standards, it's very important that fluoridation is done. This is to strengthen the tooth, especially for children where tooth development stage is there. Then it strengthens the tooth, but for all adults also, it prevents the tooth decay. So the fluoridation, that fluoride content should be maintained, should not exceed 1.2 ppm. It should be maintained between 0.7 ppm to 1.2 ppm. Similarly, chlorination, it should not exceed zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.2 ppm in water. That is, the residual chlorine should not exceed. These are the optional steps, but again, this is not the unique way of water treatment. It varies from place to place, and depending on the water content, some of the steps can be skipped and some of the steps can be included, and further few steps also can be included. You should remember that even if pre-chlorination is done, post-chlorination should be done after filtration. That is to act as a disinfectant to remove all the microorganisms. This is all for today's session. Let us meet again in another session. Until then, bye bye. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe for more informative videos. If you like the video, please click the like button and please drop your comments. Thank you. Bye bye.